Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the West Garfield Park Youth Council television show. I'm your host this evening, David Elam. I'm the President Emeritus of the West Garfield Park Youth Council. Once again, we have a powerful show for you all this evening with another phenomenal guest this evening. So let's get right into the flow. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Elam, and I'm the President Emeritus of the West Garfield Park Youth Council. The West Garfield Park Youth Council is comprised of 30 youth, which has increasingly grown since our last season, whose main focus is to provide violence prevention activities for young people on the west side of Chicago. The West Garfield Park Youth Council, which is sponsored by Fathers Who Care. Fathers Who Care is a not-for-profit organization on the west side of Chicago within the West Garfield Park community. Again, hello everyone, and my name is David Elam, and I'm the President Emeritus of the West Garfield Park Youth Council. You're watching a live interactive television broadcast today, brought to you by CAN TV Channel 21. Well, everyone, I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to let the guest to my right introduce herself, and we're going to get right into it.
Yeah, I'm attorney Louis Myers. I'm on the board of directors of Fathers Who Care. I'm now a retired professor from Chicago State University. And I live on the west side of Chicago, and that's my home. I'm glad to be on the program, and then I'm glad to see you again. I want everybody to know that this is one of the products of our West Garfield Park Youth Organization and also Fathers Who Care. We are delighted. And, you know, when I look at you, and we've been doing these shows off and on, we started out about 2 years ago. And I was inspired by you and your determination and your desire to do something. Now you finished high school, in college, back in front of the camera and making us all feel proud. So let me welcome you back.
Thank you.
All right.
We're welcoming each other back.
Right.
Well, everyone, if you're just tuning in, my name is David Elam, and I'm the President of the West Garfield Park Youth Council. During the next 25 minutes, me and attorney Louis Myers here, we're going to be discussing dispelling the negative myths associated with educating and empowering African American men. Let me say that again. Dispelling the negative myths associated with empowering and educating African American men. And I have a few questions I would like to address towards you or give you. Is that all right? Okay, first question I would like to ask. Why is there a shortage of African American males attending and graduating college?
Well, I think in order to understand that, you'd have to understand going to college, there's a predecessor to doing that. First of all, what about grades K through 12? And if you would ask the question there, probably you would get some answers after the third or fourth grade. There's a shortage of African American males who are actually in the public education system in the city of Chicago. Now, ask me what are some of the factors as to why young men drop out of school, don't finish high school, you know, go into alternative sources of life responses. And then we'd have to talk about education, the lack of education, poverty, drugs, poor housing, homelessness. There are multiple issues. There's no one issue that we can point to say, if you look at this, this is why African American young men are not in the academic and educational system. If you drop out of high school, remember now, in Chicago, the Chicago public schools now are graduating maybe 50% of, you know, the students who started out at the very beginning in like grades K1. At the end of the day, most students don't go on. Some do go on. Many students drop out. And the problem in why they're dropping out goes to poverty, lack of education. And it also goes to community environment. You know, people are not motivated, they're not stimulated. They don't want to go to school. School ain't hip. So then they drift off into gangs, they drift off into street organizations, they drift off into doing drugs. All of those interact, you know, to make it less likely that they become a part of a larger higher education community. Chicago State University is just typical. Most of the students, if you probably would look at who's at the school, predominantly women. So then you say, well, why men are not there? Why young African American men are not motivated to come like women are? And then that's a very good question, but I would say that that's the whole course in a university system to explain why, quote, we ain't there, unquote.
Well, according to the University of Chicago, statistically speaking, 84.6 youth between the African American youth between the ages of 16 and 19 are out of school and out of work. Also, 60.2% of African American males between the ages of 20 and 24 are out of school and out of work. So how can we change those stats? How can we get those stats?
Well,
to
first of all, let me be a little provocative. Who is the we in terms of how can we change? There are. I mean, it's how do we pull together a community so they can understand the significance of those statistics. Let me give you the real figures. Between the ages of 19 and about 24, unemployment for African American youth, right, is almost up to 50%. That means that half of most of the young folk, those who come out of what? Those who come out of, who make it out of the public school system, they then don't end up with jobs so they could be able to support themselves, support their families.
Right.
And if you have 50% of your youth who are unemployed, then many of us can understand the geopolitical dynamics of when we see them standing on the corners, and you're saying, why are they on the corners? Well, if they don't have jobs, and many of them don't even have housing, then where are they going to go? Right. So the real question is, how do we address the problem, the systemic problems of poverty and the lack of education and the enticement of things of the world, drugs and gangs, that lead them into other alternative paths, which normally goes into crime.
Another question. Can violence be contributed to a lack of education?
Partially. I know violent people who are educated. But at the end of the day, I think violence has to be seen as we discuss it in the context of environment. Violence is actually something that is a learned experience. It's not necessarily something that you come into the world, you come out of your mother's womb and say, you know what, today I'm going to go beat up somebody. Violence is a learned experience. And if it's a learned experience, then how do we control the factors in one's life, that either pushes a person toward being a violent person or mitigates against that? Violence is not something that you are born with. I don't believe in genetics as being the source of violence. There are some exceptional cases, which are not worthy at this moment of discussion. But violence is something that's in the environment in which you come up in. And if you come up in an environment where violent behavior is encouraged, it is acquiesced in, and it is supported, and it becomes a way of life, for people who live in that area and live in that environment, then you can expect people to act out, and they're going to be acting out based on environment and a learned experience.
Okay. So I see we have our first set of callers this evening. We're going to entertain a few calls and get right back to you. Hello, caller. You're on the air with Attorney Lewis Myers. Your comment or question, please.
I have a question. My question is, how do we stop the violence? What can we do as a community that has a lot of violence in it? What can we do to stop the violence in our community? How can we play a role in it?
Well, first of all, we as a community must organize our own selves. I mean, part of the problem is you can't stop the violence. We all know that violence is a problem, particularly in Chicago. In case some people watching the program don't know, Chicago is the #1 city in the world, when it comes to violence now, in terms of homicides, in terms of actual day-to-day violence in our communities. Chicago is known from China to Africa. And so we have to understand that what is it that's unique about Chicago that has driven the violence, particularly in the last 10 years. Violence is not new to Chicago. It was around in the 20s, it was around in the 30s, and it's been around for many, many years. What can we do? First of all, we have to begin to organize our communities and begin to teach and instruct and direct people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, to begin to hold dialogue and information discussions about the negativity of violence and how violence harms us. There has to be an educational campaign. People commit violence because most of the folk who are very violent have a tendency, and I talk to young men every day, they think it's right. I mean, I don't see a problem. Hey man, why did you slap that guy upside his head? Because he didn't respect me. He disrespected me. One of the biggest reasons that I get, including murders, you know, I represent people who have been accused of murders. I've represented people who have been accused of all types of violent behaviors. You know what they always, I said, well, why did you do what you did? I mean, why did you stab this guy? Why did you bust him across the head? Or why did you shoot him 10 times? And the answer is, he didn't respect me. Well, then I've had to search, what is it in the mindset of our young people and old folk that respect leads them to do harm to each other and harm to others? That's just one of the many things that we have to have discussions about with people who live in our community about their behavior. They have to begin to understand that violence is an unacceptable alternative to living in a civilized community. And how do you do that? Is that we have to have discussions from neighborhood to neighborhood, block to block, school to school, Chicago State University,
Right.
DePaul University, University of Chicago. They all play a role. We're an academic educational institution. We should be teaching and we should be training people away from violence, and we should be holding in the middle of the ghetto, in the middle of the gang territory. We should be having dialogue, and we should be bold enough and courageous enough to go into these neighborhoods and say, hey, there has to be another way of life, and violence cannot be acceptable here, and we got to talk about this.
Okay, and I thank you for that, but it seems like we have a numerous amount of calls. We want to try to get everybody in. So next caller, please. Thank you for calling. Your comment or question, please. You're on the air with Attorney Lou Myers.
Hi, this is Lanine Smith. I want to say good evening, Attorney Lou Myers, and
Good evening.
or as I should say in my case, Professor Myers. I want to start off by saying I admire what you do, and I enjoyed you as a professor at Chicago State, and I want to thank you for being a mentor to me and teaching me all the knowledge that I have now.
Thank you very
My
much.
question to you is, what resources are available to assist ex-offenders in finding employment?
What was it?
What resources are available to helping ex-offenders find employment?
Well, there are a number of resources now. I work with a reentry program. There are a number of reentry programs that are available for young men who've been incarcerated, who have been down for example, in the Illinois prison system. You know, and there are programs that address the issues of what we call returning citizens. You know, we don't call ex-offenders, or we don't call them ex-offenders. They are returning citizens. They're people who left our community for sometimes very, very negative reasons. But there are programs that are available to people who are coming back into our communities after having been incarcerated, sometimes for a number of years, sometimes for a short period of time. But those programs deal with finding people jobs. One of the big challenges of ex-offenders is finding housing. If you have a felony conviction on your background, you won't be living in CHA. And so when they come home, they don't have places to live. It's getting them back in school. We would love for ex-offenders, you know, people who are now returning citizens, you know, having spent time in an incarcerated environment, they are coming back, and if they desire to get an education, schools like, well, so let's start with city colleges. City colleges should make their schools available so that they can enroll and take classes to them better themselves. Chicago State University, a number of other universities should reach out for them. We have a responsibility. The people who are coming back, you know, from being incarcerated, believe it or not, they're coming back to our neighborhoods. And either you're going to help them find housing, you're going to help them find jobs, you're going to help them deal with their anger management problems, or they will be on the streets for a short period of time, going back, doing the same negative things that sent them away the first time. So there are programs that are available. Benny Lee, I work with a young man by the name of Benny Lee, and he has an excellent program dealing with ex-offenders. In fact, I've been working with that program. I'm on the board of directors of it. And, you know, we deal with the formerly incarcerated. And I have watched for now more than 7 or 8 years people coming out of the system, coming to our program, coming into our circles. At one point, we were having them every Saturday morning. And we were helping finding them jobs, finding housing, dealing with their issues of anger management, getting them acclimated in dealing with other people other than people that they were incarcerated with, getting back in touch with, and this is something I didn't say. It is so important for people who have been incarcerated and who are coming back into the system, get back in contact with your family. You would be surprised the number of African American men in the Illinois Department of Corrections who have sons and daughters who live in our communities. And when they're coming home, Dad is coming back home. Daddy has to learn family skills. Daddy has to learn all over again how do you embrace those children that are in your home. There are multiple things that we can do for returning offenders. I am glad, Lenine, that you asked that question, and you were one of my good students, and I'm so, so proud of you working with Fathers Who Care.
Next caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air with Attorney Lou Myers. Your comment or question, please.
How you doing, Professor? This is Quan, and I wanted to ask, do you believe in second chances?
Do you believe in second chances?
I believe in second chances, third chances, fourth chances. I believe in redemption, period. One of the things Reverend Walter Jones and I have in common, we belong to the same church. Reverend Jones is an associate pastor in my church. He's influenced me over the years, got me very much involved in church work. Now, I believe in redemption. I believe that even if you try and fail, the challenge is not the failure. The challenge is, can you have the strength to get up and keep on fighting? And so there are going to be challenges. And I often counsel people who have addictions. And people say, well, you know, I'm off drugs today. And then you see them 6 months later, and they back on the crack, and they back on the heroin, and they're back on this, that, and the other. And somebody say, I told you they weren't any good. No. We have to keep working with them. You know, I believe that we have an investment in human beings, as human beings, to help other human beings. And when we have people who have problems and people who have come from negative experiences, they are going to fall down. The role, your role, my role, so those who are listening, when they fall down, pick them up. Okay. And if they don't want to get up, talk about them for staying down. Okay. Talk them back on their feet. Talk them back into a righteous way of life, and talk them back into being somebody.
Next caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air with Attorney Louis Myers. Your comment or question, please.
Good evening, Professor Myers. How are you?
I'm doing
good. My name
good.
is Korea Berry, and I am also a former student of yours from Chicago State University, and I just wanted to let you know that these years with you have been wonderful, and everything has been so intellectual with you. And I just wanted to say thank you for the experience and with your youth empowerment, criminal justice, domestic violence seminars, and everything. Your work definitely doesn't go unnoticed. So I just wanted to let you know that and thank you for your hard work and dedication. My question to you, though, is because certain myths about young men are perceived to be true, how do we indoctrinate young men's beliefs that they can achieve?
How
can we indoctrinate young men to believe that they can achieve?
That's, well, first of all, thank you very much. And you too were one of my star students. And I am so glad that you are taking the time to work with Fathers Who Care, and that you're working with the young folk. Both you and Lenine are setting an example here on the west side of Chicago for the young women in our program and for the young men. How do you inspire people to go on? Well, first of all, you have to understand what their circumstance and their situations happen to be. And at the end of the day, we have to be a forum. We have to be a platform for them to come to and to share their pain, to share their agonies, to share their frustrations with. And then we have to be able to have something to tell them. And so when a person comes to you and say, I've been down, and I don't feel like getting up, and I don't feel like being what God has given me a talent to be. You know, I don't have that energy. We have to inspire them but we have to direct them and we have to teach them. And I heard Lenine say last week in the program here, we have to have some goals and objectives for them. We have to monitor them. We have to hold their hands, and we have to follow them from the beginning of the time that they have a contact with us and our organization, or if it's just a contact with us. I always do this with young folk. I don't turn them away.
Yep.
When they walk into my office and say, Mr. Myers, I want to talk to you, then I will sit there for as long as they want to talk. But I will never let them leave without providing some information that I think might be helpful. And then I always make an appointment to see when can I talk to them again and to make sure I can follow up on some of the things and some of the advice that I've given them.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, my name is David Elam, and I'm the President Emeritus of the West Garfield Park Youth Council. My guest this evening is Attorney Lou Myers, and we're discussing the topic of dispelling the negative myths associated with empowering and educating of young African-American men. Also, Fathers Who Care is currently seeking employers. So if you are a vendor or an agency with employment opportunities for young people, please contact Fathers Who Care at 773-287-5821. Again, that number is 773-287-5821. Next caller. Hello, caller. Thank you so much for calling. You're on the air with Attorney Louis Myers. Your comment or question, please.
Hello, this is Marshayla. My question is, do you think having a father figure can lead you down a path of destruction?
I believe her question was, do you believe the lack of not having a father can lead you down a path of destruction?
No. Why I don't believe that? Because nobody can lead you down a path of destruction unless you set yourself on that path. Now, there are multiple reasons why you may be frustrated because there's a lack of a male in your household. Let me give you a statistic which I think holds to be true. Probably 71%, between 69 and 71% of most African American households do not have men in them. That means most African American young people are raised by their mothers or grandmothers. And at the end of the day, I think many of their mothers, like my mother, have done an excellent job. My mother inspired me to go on, notwithstanding that I had a rather hectic relationship with my father. And I think that the lack of a father in the home is not fatal to your growth and development. You have to have the strength and the courage, and you have to have a determination to fight against all odds and to go on to be whatever it is that you've been given the blessing to be. So you looking in support, you could have a grandmother, you could have a mother, you could have a man in your church. There are other people who can be around you that can be just as inspirational and take the father role to help lead you through whatever it is that you need to be led through so that you can go on to be a productive citizen.
Next caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air with Attorney Louis Myers. Your comment or question, please.
I have a question.
Yes.
What was your environment like growing up?
What was my environment like growing up? Well, I actually grew up in Houston, Texas. I'm not from Chicago. And I grew up, and while we didn't have major gang problems when I was growing up as a youth, we had violence problems. Not anywhere like it is today in terms of shooting. People weren't shooting and killing like they are today in Chicago. When I came up, there were fights, and there were fights in the school, there were fights in the neighborhood. But people tended to be, even in the fighting situation, a little more civilized. And over a period of time, there were structures in our community. The church, there were community organizations, there were older people, there were grandparents, there were multiple places, for us in our neighborhoods to go. And I started playing Little League Baseball when I was about 8. And I played on a Little League Baseball team, I played on a Little League football team, and I played in all different sports. But our communities at that time had those kinds of things for us to do. We don't have that now. So I grew up in an environment, while it might have been a little rough, at the end of the day, there was still respect among people in that community that I grew up in.
Next caller. Thank you, caller, for calling. Your comment or question, please. You're on the air with Attorney Lewis Myers.
Hi, this is Shanta, and my question is, what step did it take to get you where you are?
Well, determination, but that would be hypocritical if I was to say how I got to where I was, how I got to where I am today, right? I had a wonderful mother. And there were people who were in my life at a very young age that were very encouraging, very passionate. And over a number of years, every time I tended to stumble, and there were times that I didn't want to be anything. There were times when the worst in me came out. And I rejected, at one point, even going on from high school, going on to college. But there was always somebody who was around me in my environment. And principally, my mother, but then other people who gave me inspiration to go on. And so environment and people to encourage you to remain determined are extraordinarily important, and I'm extraordinarily thankful that in my life that I had people like that.
Next caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air with Attorney Lewis Myers. Your comment or question, please.
Hello, this is Paige, and I'm calling to ask, did you have any role models growing up?
Did I have?
Any role models growing up?
I did. Actually, this is really funny. When I was a young man in high school, I got in trouble. And I got in trouble, with a criminal case. And first time I had an interaction with a lawyer, he was representing me as a juvenile.
Wow.
And man, and I said, this guy he wears a suit every day, he got a shirt and tie, and he likes to argue. And I was really impressed by that lawyer. And over a number of years, I don't know what it was, he became a role model of sorts for me. There were other men, particularly spiritual men, who came into my life. My pastor, Reverend Howard Oliver Scott. I joined the church when I was about 12 years old. And, I think I stayed faithful for a number of years. Yes, there were role models. There were men that I looked up to. And there were men that I admired. And I would always say, one day, if God would just bless me to give me what you gave them, then I'll be something in life.
Well, Attorney Lewis Myers, I want to thank you for being a guest this evening. Unfortunately, our gracious time is coming to an end.
It always runs out. I think
Yes.
you're playing there, David. Come on now.
No, I wish we could go longer, but, I want to thank everyone who called in. I want to thank the viewers who watched the show this evening. Please tune in next week. We'll be back here, same time, same place. We love you. God bless. Good night.